Hi, for DevOps Summit 2014 here in New York City, I'm Andi Mann. Today we've organised a panel session with some of our expert speakers who are going to be at the conference. So I'll let them introduce themselves, starting over on this side, JP.
Hi, I'm JP Morgenthal. I'm the Director of Cloud Computing Practice for Perficient.
Hi, I'm Gordon Haff. I'm in the Cloud Product Strategy Group at Red Hat.
Larry Carvalho, I'm a research analyst for Platform as a Service for IDC.
And my name is John Willis. I'm VP of Customer Enablement for a startup called Stateless Networks.
Fantastic. Welcome to the panel, guys.
Thanks.
Look, I want to talk today about whether DevOps is changing enterprise IT. So JP, why don't you start? What do you think? Is DevOps changing enterprise IT?
I think DevOps has tremendous potential to change enterprise IT. I think that we're on the beginning of a road. I think there's some great examples for smaller companies and startups that are demonstrating the way. But I think enterprise needs to mold DevOps to its needs and understand the differentiations for how to deploy that in a large, multifaceted IT department.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that, Andy. We're in very early days for DevOps in mainstream enterprises today. It's still very fragmentary, very ad hoc. And I think one of the reasons is that DevOps affects not only the tools, but also the processes and cultures. And that's a lot of throw weight, if you would, that an enterprise has to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's a people, process, technology triumvirate, right? I mean, Larry, what do you reckon?
I think this is a great way for enterprises to finally reach the level of agility they can get and really create an environment that development and operations can deliver value to the business much faster.
John?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, and respectfully, it's because, 5 years ago, I was involved in the original DevOps days in Ghent, and I've been tracking this very closely for 5 years, longer than that, but from the coined word DevOps at least. And I would say early on, you would say very small percentage of people were using DevOps. Now there's been some surveys. The 451 group has done a survey. The second anniversary of the Puppet Labs generated by Gene Kim. And there's no hard numbers, but they're looking to creep up near like 18. So I think that the memo is out in the enterprise. Everybody in the enterprise understands that this DevOps is a thing that is real, and it creates performance enhancements if you can figure out how to get handled. But the numbers are still small, but the answer is yes.
So John, just extending that, how are people's jobs changing in enterprise IT? I mean, it's tough to change people's everyday lives. What are you seeing there?
Well, there's the legacy and there's web scale, right? So web scale, the percentage is extremely high in DevOps, right? So what you're seeing in the enterprise, and I know all you guys see this, is we're starting to see enterprise trying to become web scale, right? In some forms, it's things like OpenStack and private cloud. In other forms, it's like high frequency trading environments where we have to change the way we're doing things. So in the web scale, it's immediate. The plumbing is the change, and DevOps becomes the obvious choice. In legacy, much harder. It is a tooling. It's changing how to change your mindset of things like, understanding failure modes differently than the way you have, understanding organizational behavior patterns. It's very difficult for the legacy implementations to get a handle.
Yeah, legacy is a real interesting challenge, I know, and you've been around quite a bit, Larry. You've seen a lot of legacy organizations. How does that work with legacy environments? Is that possible?
It is possible. The biggest issue, I think, from a legacy environment is the culture. So the organizations are really not getting to advise their users and get the skills to develop things in a whole different way, like John was saying about the web scale. How do you take web scale and apply it to your legacy environment? That is the biggest challenge. And how do you change your whole culture to adapt to this new way of doing business, to the new way of development, in bringing value to your business?
And Gordon, I mean, with Red Hat, you're obviously dealing with some of the largest enterprises in the world. Are you seeing these changes even in the legacy environment?
Well, it depends what type of industry you're talking about. well. And so you look at leading edge, technology-focused companies, financial services, for example, also some of the logistics companies, certain types of manufacturing companies. On the other hand, you'll talk particularly to smaller regional banks and the like, and they're still taking 6 weeks to provision a new server. I mean, that's normal. So I think we need to be a little bit realistic about the pace that these kind of changes can occur and where they're going to occur first.
So how fast can changes occur, JP? Do you think, I mean, in a larger enterprise, you're working, obviously, consulting with a lot of different organizations. How quickly can these people change? I mean, it's not an overnight thing, right?
It can't be an overnight thing, unfortunately, and that's actually one of the major concerns here is that, there's such emphasis on the tooling that I believe that people, once again, are looking for a silver bullet, and this is just plain old hard work, and it's really identifying the issues that are in your path and correcting them so that you can maximize your resources. I mean, that's really what this is all about, getting to is appropriate enterprise uses of assets and resources in the enterprise. And that's where you get your velocity, right? If you can align your technology groups to understand what the business needs, what are the most critical factors to the business, what should I work on that has the highest priority to enabling my business to succeed, that, and putting my energies there instead of focusing on trying to consume all of it, which they just don't have the resources to accomplish, and B, understanding where time is being spent inordinate to where levels to where the business wants to go. When you can align that, when you get that in order, the tooling is the piece that helps you to get rid of the repetitive tasks, to make sure that you don't have configuration drift, to enable rapid deployment in a highly successful way. That's what the tools are there for. But you got to clear that first hurdle in order to really take advantage of the tools.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I know one of the analyst firms has spoken about, and I know that our at CA Technologies, my company, the chief DevOps architect has spoken about this idea of going at a different pace for different types of systems, systems of engagement, systems of differentiation, systems of innovation. And so the legacy systems, you might not go quite as fast with them, whereas the new innovative systems, maybe mobile apps, maybe new cloud capabilities, this sort of stuff, the real systems of engagement, that's where you can start to go a bit more rapidly. But JP, you brought up tools, and I think that's a really interesting one, because I think we all know that DevOps is primarily cultural. There's a lot of change that has to happen with process and with people, but there is technology involved. And John, you've been around this a long time. You've seen from the early days when it was starting with, I guess, just scripting, and now tools have developed. What are you seeing, especially for enterprise? What are the special
Yeah, there's
tools
a gap between tools and culture. So I'm a big fan of culture, obviously. Yeah. I mean, I've been preaching Deming for, as how Deming to DevOps, but there's an in-between between just pure tools and culture, and that is the flow. Right, the understanding, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm actually trying to reinvent myself in the network space. And I'm going back and I'm looking at what we've done successfully really over 10 years. From the first time I saw Puppet, right, which was about 8-9 years ago. And what I realized is that there's a middle ground, and it's about the flow. And it's very simple. It's source control. It's this pull model, it's collaboration, it's things like Git or GitHub, right, where there's a peering request on every change, there's automated testing, behavior-driven testing, and I think those become, before we even talk about the tools, is changing the culture to understand how to create that kind of flow, which is that continuous what ultimately becomes the holy grail, which is the continuous delivery model, right?
Yeah, so absolutely. Larry, continuous delivery, is that something that your clients are talking about?
Absolutely.
You're helping them?
That is one place which people don't understand, because the amount of workload, the backlog of requests that are coming to IT, saying that we need all this new requirements, new solutions, and there are a lot of times on systems of engagement that workload is increasing. Yeah. As a result, when they develop all these applications, is their maintenance workload going to go up the same way, or are they going to start using continuous integration, continuous delivery to really reduce that? And all of these solutions that are now being requested requires rapid application improvements, upgrades, that should not take the kind of effort it took in the legacy environment. So there is, like John said, a true cultural shift in thinking that when you start developing these applications, you need to start thinking in the long term and say, how are we going to keep up with all the upgrades and the changes that are going to be required out of these applications, and how are we going to meet them very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Excuse me, Andy?
Yes, JP.
I don't know what the process here for jumping in.
Yeah, jump in.
But we've heard this term culture twice, and I really want to address it because I think the culture, the word changing culture scares a lot of enterprise IT people. And I think it's misunderstood, and we toss it around kind of willy-nilly, and I believe that there's a lot of different perspectives on what people mean by changing culture. A lot of people see it as kumbaya, we'll all hold hands and sing, happy songs together around the table, and then we'll get our work done. And, for enterprise IT of the size of 2,000-3,000 people spread across multiple content, we know that's not going to be the case. And really, I think the important aspect of culture when we talk about it is that it's from the beginning, from the onset, and what John talks about and Deming and all those guys, the culture is one of continuous improvement. Making sure that you're changing your organization on not only focusing on what the business needs, but taking time in between to improve something about the organization, using feedback loops to improve the process. Take something out of the process every time you go through it so that it gets shorter, higher quality, better. It's not about all being on the same page. It's not about having flat organizations and everybody having to agree. It doesn't remove your command and control infrastructure from the organization. It's, and I think that we need to be more careful when we toss around this cultural change. We saw it in the Shannon Solomon piece on Wall Street Journal. She made a comment, businesses can't sell DevOps tools because they have to first face this big cultural revolution. It's not a cultural revolution. It's applying lean principles back to the organization.
But it's pretty fundamental change, though, don't you? I mean, sorry, you were going to say?
I think it's fundamental change, but I think to the point there is that I think historically, DevOps was this, developers and operators are going to just become one position, and developers are going to be given the root password to the SQL Server, and, we know how that will turn out. Probably not very well. But what you actually see, for example, and I know you've written about this, Andy, is one of the things we're doing is extensive monitoring and tools down at lower levels that essentially automate away a lot of the routine tasks that the operator needs to do. And then that lets developers go ahead and essentially do things on their own because nobody needs to manually do those tasks any longer. And that's one of the fundamental changes I see coming. And if that's a cultural change, okay. But I think it's different from kind of the kumbaya type of cultural change.
Yeah, and this is really important, this idea of doing things, continuous improvement I think is a really interesting concept because it harkens back to some of the days of the total quality management and these, which the pointy-haired boss is going to say, oh no, that's a good thing.
Yeah. To JP's point, right? There's a word for it. It's called Kaizen, right? And so, but it even goes deeper. The reason I try not to bring Deming up because then it gets all crazy. But he had a thing called PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, right? Which is really scientific method. So the key here is that if your organization is continually improving, and the way you continue to improve is the feedback. You plan, you do, you study, you then do an analysis on what the action was. And one of the greatest quotes was from the Harvard Business Review on Toyota Production Systems, where they said that that Toyota Production Systems, which was the original Lean, right? So, which was they were a community of scientists continually experimenting. Right, and like when you think about the companies that I admire in web scale that I would say are poster childs for DevOps, that's the way they behave. Everything is kind of scientifically, they do things, they check the results, it's monitoring, it's feedback loops, and the way you improve is not just do it and say what happened, it's do it and then actually look at the results and decide what happens next. Was it a failure or a success? Let's improve on that.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like to just add to that, and this is important since this is a panel on enterprise DevOps, is you need to make room and allow it to be okay to fail. And I think that is something that in enterprises in general has kind of been removed and replaced with CYA.
It's scary, right?
Well, yeah, right? Fail? Oh my God, am I going to lose my job? So we talk about cultural change. That's probably one of the bigger aspects of that change is the enablement, allowing fail, but fail small and fail fast.
But that's why, and that's why the PDSA is so important, because failure is success. Right? That's the point. It's a learning opportunity, right? And so, yeah.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that I feel that is important about culture is this whole concept of automation and improvement, which comes from the manufacturing industry, and you talked about Deming, and that's what is changing the environment, and that's what is a cultural change. And I like enterprises to be a little uncomfortable to say that we need a cultural change to change what we have been doing all along, where we have been doing things manually, and now we are going to code stuff for automation, and that's a change in behavior. So I understand that culture, sometimes scares people, but it's good to scare them because they have to change, and that's what all the web scale companies are doing. They're just running it like a shop floor assembly line. And that's how they run their whole IT operations.
And as we said, when they're changing technologies, and they're changing approaches, they're really changing the fundamental business model in a lot of ways. I mean, you look at some of the firms who are doing these sorts of things. I mean, obviously Amazon Web Services, Netflix, Zynga, a bunch of others. In the web startup kind of area, they're changing their business models, not just tech. And I think that's a really keen outcome of DevOps as well.
You make an excellent point, and one that needs to be further explored, which is how all the companies you just mentioned have executive support. Driving the DevOps. Okay, everyone talks about Netflix being a poster child for DevOps, but let's be honest. Adrian Cockcroft drove his vision and said, this is the way it's going to be, and with that kind of alignment and an executive sponsorship, you can succeed. If you're going to expect a bunch of developers from grassroots to drive this all the way up to the upper levels in your organization, you're not going to see the same levels of success.
So how do you get that executive support?
Oh, you hire me.
And, I mean, John, you've obviously been in organisations trying to get that working.
I'm starting to see it. I mean, you talk about Adrian, but to me, the poster child is Etsy and Chad Dickinson, right? Like he was a software engineer, now CEO, and that's common for software companies, but for retail companies, that doesn't happen often. And you see the culture there, and it stems from that. I'm starting to see some enterprises, not at the highest level, but at the C level, where new guys are coming in who have experienced this kind of DevOps-y, cloudy, whatever you want to call it, and they're open from it, and then whole divisions are basically changing their mindset. But I agree with you completely. If you don't have executive buy-in, particularly legacy, web scale, you can try, you can fail, you can try, you can fail.
It's greenfield.
But in the large enterprise, you don't have that luxury. So it has to be at the top level or near the top level, or else really it's just it's a shadow project.
And the thing is, it really goes beyond DevOps, what we're talking about here too. For example, you may also be looking at your portfolio and say, hey, here's some things we're doing like email that are sucking up our resources and we're not getting any return from them. So let's outsource that. So DevOps really is also part of this bigger sort of IT portfolio, partnering with businesses. What can IT do to create more business value as opposed to just a narrow, how do we develop applications?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, because especially with a large enterprise scale IT organization, any good program starts with a good plan. With a large organization where you've got 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 different applications, you got thousands of developers. Someone like Bank of America has more developers than Microsoft, right? So being able to plan out, where do I start? How do I eat this elephant one bite at a time is absolutely going to be critical. Just before we finish, and we're close to done, I wanted to touch on how do you convince executives that you're not going to break stuff, right? You talked earlier on about having the keys to the kingdom, having passwords, developers being able to do what they need to when they need to, operators being able to instantiate infrastructure as code. How do you make sure that the pointy-haired boss gets that you're not going to break everything? You're going to be compliant, you're going to follow regulations, you have functional isolation, security is going to be in place. Do we have solutions for that stuff?
It's actually, you're getting closer to that than you probably are today. I think that's the first step to show. We're moving now. When we take on this initiative, is stuff not going to break immediately? We may have the typical debug trail where you go up and then down, right? Because initially we're implementing something that's changed. Can't be afraid to fail. Just fail small. But ultimately, as we implement those processes, as we begin to follow those lean and agile approaches, and as we start to add automation, the things that they fear most will be better cared for under the new initiative than they will probably today.
Interesting. Larry, I mean, obviously with ADC, you're big end of town clients, are they worried about this?
Absolutely. But one of the things is you got to change, when you're bringing in from an executive side, you got to tell what are you going to tackle first. When you just don't throw your most important core banking, into a DevOps environment right up front. Pick the ones that you can deal with some outages, experiment with those, and then start moving up. So you've got to take the right path to go. And I've seen a lot of folks get the right skills and even move to the right environment. Hey, open a small place in a place like Silicon Valley or something like that where you can get the right talent, because there's still a lot of skill shortage in my perception among enterprises to help them take that step and move forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think we look at what's happening a lot now in the kind of the echo chamber DevOps people, right? The real web scale is looking a lot at other industries. Aviation is a good example, right? Yep. I don't know what the numbers are, but in a plane ride, there are so many failures that are just part of the normal operation of flying a plane, right? And as our scale and complexity grows in infrastructure, we have no choice but to start thinking that way. We can't start doing this. The big theme right now is mean time to resolution, right? MTTR, right? As opposed to mean time between failure. Like the mean time between failure, that's gone, right? Like trying to predict failures and stop failures when we're exponentially growing in scale and complexity. We have to change the model and look at other industries and how they've done it. And aviation is one, and there's many others who've embraced failure as part of the structure.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, guys, that's all we have time for. What I'm going to do, though, I'm going to let you all finish, because I know there's going to be other questions. Other people are going to want to ask you guys questions. So what should they read, and where can they get in contact with you, John?
So I'm Botchagaloop on Twitter is probably the best place to find me. And from there you can pretty much, I'm on Twitter just about all the time, so that's the best place.
Larry?
I'm on Twitter, I'm at robustcloud.com, and you can go to idc.com and find me on IDC, Larry Carvalho.
Great. So I'm Andi Mann on Twitter, ANDIMANN, and from there, as John said, you can find everything else I write. Gordon?
Well, you can just search for Gordon Haff, and on Twitter, I'm at GHAFF.
JP?
And at JP Morgenthal, MORGENTHAL on Twitter, and also jpmorgenthal.com.
Great. So from the DevOps Summit 2014 here in New York City, I'm Andi Mann. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cool.